morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining. At CIQ, we're focused on powering the next generation of software infrastructure, leveraging the capabilities of cloud, hyperscale, and HPC. From research to the enterprise, our customers rely on us for the ultimate Rocky Linux, Werewolf, and Apptainer support escalation. We provide deep development capabilities and solutions, all delivered in the collaborative spirit of open source.
Oh, there we go. I can see my face and your faces. Hey, you guys, welcome to Thursday, August 15th. We are live on channel YouTube. Coming to you. Thanks for being here, guys. Always very exciting to chat with you. So this is actually kind of fun. Several weeks ago, we were talking about AI and data centers and power and environmental considerations, but we just like scratched the surface, and it was very clear we were like at the top of an entire hour having conversation that we wanted to talk more about this and dive a little bit deeper. So let's do that. And first, I just want to like welcome everyone who's watching. Hello and welcome. Thank you. CIQ, which is the place that I think all of these beautiful people work at. These are all my coworkers that I get to see in little squares on Zoom on a regular basis. So always an honor. So make sure that you like and subscribe, turn on the notifications. We are usually here each week live. Sometimes it's a little recorded session so we can do like a solid demo for you or something like that. And if you have an idea, something that you would like us to focus on, please leave that in the comments. We want to be of service to you and helpful to you in your compute world. So let's dive into it. Maybe we'll do a little introductions, and then we're going to get into these AI data centers and talk about environmental concerns. And it's good to bring these two things together, right? Technology and like really just going off into space with all things that are, even remotely possible, and then kind of grounding ourselves a little bit in like what's going on with our planet and with our environment, and how can we have these two things working together. So very excited for this topic. Dave Godlove, say hello.
Hello.
Solid.
I'm Dave Godlove. I'm also a dad, so the dad jokes, the dad humor are going to be coming out a little bit every now and again. But yeah, so I'm a technical product writer for CIQ, working to Fernando. Hey. Working to document fuzzball currently. Used to be at the NIH. I don't know. That's enough.
All the wonderful things. I mean, you had me at dad. You just did. You are a wonderful dad. Your children are lucky to have you, no matter what they say. Forrest, what's up, man?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Forrest Burt. I'm a technical sales specialist here at CIQ. I have a background in HPC solutions architecture and engineering, and before CIQ was a sysadmin at Boise State University, so I've been kind of in the HPC space, especially in the academic and national lab space for a while. So great to be on the call with everyone.
Awesome. Welcome. Glad you're here. Fernanda, welcome. Pop it in. Introduce yourself. Perfect timing.
Hey. Yeah, I'm Fernanda Forder. I am at Voltron Data, which is a startup working on scalable data analytics solutions that are accelerated on the GPU. And my background is also DOE, labs, HPC engineering, training, all sorts of things.
All the things. Whatever's needed at the time, she's just like, I got this. I can do it.
I've done whatever's interesting at the time. I've done it. I'm coming to you from Brazil, actually. I'm in a hotel. It's my last day here. I spent the last almost month visiting my homeland. I haven't been here since 2013, and I got to finally bring my kids over. So in the topic of dad and mom and parenting, finally brought my grown children over to visit where I grew up.
Wow, that's really special. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been great. It's been great.
Yeah, way cool. All right, so what time is it there, and what's the weather like?
The weather is perfect. I don't know if you can see from there.
Bright
It's
and
kind of hard to
sunny.
see, but that window is the beach is right there.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I am spending time with you instead of being at the beach, but pretty soon, as soon as we're done here, I'm going to go to the beach for one last time.
Okay. Pick up the speed. Well, thank you. Thank you for being with us. See, you guys, this is how special and important we are, right? And this is how important community is. So that is awesome. Thank you. All right, Mr. Jonathan, who are you, sir?
Hey, Rose. Yeah, so my name is Jonathan Anderson. I'm an HPC engineer with CIQ. Right now I'm primarily on the software side. I work mostly with Fuzzball and Werewolf, but in past lives I've done a fair bit of data center and that kind of thing too. So happy to talk about the power and cooling. I know less about AI, but we'll come up with something, I'm sure.
Well, that is actually interesting, and it begs the question of the title and topic of our session here today is AI and data center power and environmental considerations. So, what is the difference there between a data center and AI?
Well, I mean, there might be. Oh, man, apparently my volume is low again. Just a moment. Man, it's already boosted.
I know you got a big fancy microphone, man. It should work.
Yeah. Just put my face right here.
There you go.
We're going into the radio voice now.
Yeah. Between data center and AI, like those are not comparable, but there are data center specific to AI data center concerns, mostly just because of the density you tend to get in an AI data center. You're dealing with, usually many GPU per node systems at that point, and so you're almost certainly water cooling, probably direct-to-chip water cooling. And so what running a data center like that looks like is very different from let's say, an enterprise data center or even an HPC data center, where in an enterprise data center, you might just have like open air, and then you just like try and manage your airflow so that there's cool air in front of the intake for your computers. In an HPC environment, at least, historically, maybe you have like confined hot aisle or confined cold aisle to better manage that. But increasingly, like HPC and AI are converging, and so you're getting more and more water cooling anyway in a traditional HPC environment, just like in an AI system.
I mean, we could maybe flesh that out a little bit more too, like, I mean, what the cold aisle and the hot aisle means and stuff like that. I mean, essentially, from my understanding and from my experience, I could be wrong, but I think like basically you essentially usually a couple of I'm getting some echo. Usually you line up a couple of rows of racks in such a way that their backs are facing each other and there's an aisle between them, and you set up your airflow in such a way that you've got cool air running into the front, I guess.
Yeah, usually air intake on the front,
sucked in and blown out the back, and so you've got like the combined all the fans on the racks plus the circulation that you've got in the room is actually driving the air through these racks up and cooling them out. And that's kind of like the traditional way of doing it that Jonathan was talking about.
Yeah, you can imagine like the most generic enterprise version of that is you just do that and you point all of your hot in the same direction, just so that you aren't blowing the hot air from one computer into the intake of another. And then you air condition the room and you try and maintain a certain air temperature and air humidity in the room. But you don't worry too much about it because maybe you don't have much of a heat load. As that heat load goes up, maybe you can't cool it fast enough for all that air volume. It takes a lot more work to cool all of the air in the room. So maybe you build a box around where the hot air is going. And so now you don't have to keep recooling the same air that's also already cool. You just focus on cooling the hot air that's in that hot aisle before you release it back out into the room. So a situation I've seen many times in the past is you have rows of computers and every other rack or every fourth rack or something like that is basically a big air conditioner. And it takes intake from the hot side and then blows cold air back into the cold side. And then that thing is water cooled. But so there's always water somewhere. But it's just about how close you want to let the water get to your expensive computer.
So like how many nodes would you need to start cooling in that way, right? Because like I don't need that with my laptop. It's got like its own little fan thing that goes on every now and then. But I'm also not using it 24 hours a day. So like at what point do you need, okay, so there's air cooling. So you have like an air conditioner type of thing where it's like intentionally cold air, not just like circulating air and moving it around. So you have some kind of like air conditioning, you have a hot space. You can do all sorts of different things with that. At some point there's water. There's also some weird liquid that you can like submerge your machines into, and somehow it doesn't do it damage, but water does. So there's so many questions here. Fernanda, help me out.
So you can cool with air, right? So what you want to do is you want to get air, hot air out of the system. One of the reasons why you want to do that is because the system will perform better in the long run if it's cooled. It's not going to go through a lot of wear and tear, right? And you're not going to, if it overheats, you're not going to literally break the chips. There have been scenarios in the past where boards will bend. So we had famous stories back from ORNL where the board would have bent, and then the RAM that sat on a RAM, little thing, little connector, would just kind of pop out of the board because the board was bending with heat. So that's one way to cool it. Another one is let's water cool it. So you have, instead of a heat sink that sits on top of the systems, whether that's the RAM or the GPU or the CPU, you've got a plate that's a heat exchanger, and it sits right on top of it. And then water goes into that plate. It doesn't come into contact with the CPU, but it exchanges heat through a metal plate or through a metal base. So that's another way to do it. Another way to do it is to do it with warm water. What you really need is a differential in temperature, right? So you don't need the chip necessarily to be at 0 degrees. What you need the chip to be is Celsius. You need the chip to be below 65 degrees Celsius, or more or less. So you want to lower that temperature more to the 40s and 30s, and you can do that with what's called warm water. It's just essentially room temperature water that's 75 degrees, and it's going to take that heat away, and it's going, it's just going to be a heat sink. And the last one is what you mentioned, is this where you dip into this inert fluid, which is basically a mineral oil that's been stripped of any minerals, which minerals are the thing in water that make it capable of conducting electricity and shorting out a system. And you don't want that. So you stick it into this oil vat that looks like a giant frying machine, and then you circulate that through a heat exchanger, the oil itself, and you just circulate that around, and it's much better at capturing the heat, and you don't have heat going into the external environment and you have to heat. So it's a lot less volume that you have to cool down versus, say, cooling down an entire room where a data center would sit. And that tends to be more efficient, but there's still, heat coming out of a chip, and there's still heat going into an environment. It's just the matter now of deciding efficiency and how much you're willing to create infrastructure to bring in to do all this cooling, whether it's AC or chilling water. Chillers are very expensive. They're very big. It requires space. Warm water doesn't require the huge chillers usually, but you still need chillers. And then this, oil vat sort of scenario require still some capability in chilling or something like that. You still have to dump the heat out somewhere. Otherwise, it just kind of takes all the heat. And then now what? Now it's hot oil, right?
And the oil,
Sounds
it's
like
heavy. It's just physically heavy, right? So your racks end up weighing like, a couple of cars per rack. And then, so you got to make sure that you're building your actual, if you actually have a large cluster of these things, you got to make sure that you're building the floor can physically support like a bunch of, semi trucks lined up next to each other or whatever.
Right. And those are considerations you have to make. For example, in the air system, you make the floor kind of float so that you bring in cold air from the bottom, and the tiles that line the floor, you remove it, and then it goes straight into that that box that holds all the machines. In this case, usually put it straight on a concrete floor. You don't have a raised floor. And then it can be messy too. So if you have to go in there and do something to the machine, like unplug, and no one that's ever worked in a data center likes pulling out those things. It's oil, and it gets all over you, and it's kind of all over the floor. It becomes kind of a hazard. But it's super efficient, and it's both fascinating to me, but also I don't want to be the person that has to be in the machine room.
Wow, this is okay. So we've got all these different ways to cool, but the electricity's coming. So I'm also thinking like fire. Like, would it ever be an oil fire?
No, this is like mineral oil. It's a very inert sort of. I don't think that fire is the issue with this. It's mostly just a pain. I think it's just, people would rather pull a rack out of a regular old rack than to have to pull a rack out of something that's been dipped in oil. But otherwise, it's really efficient. It's really good for the environment. You can move, like, the space that you need is very small. I mean, I think it's in Japan, and that they have these containers that you can just bring in a container full of these things, and it's super efficient space wise. And you can just put it right next to whatever, place you want to do your compute, and you just pile it on containers. No big deal.
Huh. Forrest, how did you guys cool your cluster, were the places that you've worked?
So the first cluster that we had was pretty small. It had, I think, about 40 nodes or so in it, and it was mostly air cooled. It's actually kind of an amusing little area. There was this big concrete room in the third floor of the computer science building, and they had built kind of this, like, essentially wind tunnel in it. So one wall was taken up by this massive air conditioning unit that was took up half of the room basically, and put out a huge, quite a blast of wind after you've been in there for 6 or 7 hours on you. So you always had to hold the crash cart and stuff like that, because it was a pretty decent gust going through there.
Your hair's all to the side by the time you come out.
Yeah, and so they had so this was at the front of the room, and then they had kind of this U-shaped deal, and the front sides of the machines were oriented to the inside of the U. So the heat was pushed out to the outside of it. So as the wind came forward through it, it would push through the machines and push the heat back into the rest of the room. So those were pretty small. That was where they were running, our little cluster, the old kind of test cluster, and then some of just the cyber infrastructure for the department. So that was pretty small. That didn't require much advanced cooling. And one notable incident, it became apparent that air conditioning unit was not on the backup power system. But with everything on a UPS, the machines, we realized, stayed on in event of a power outage while the cooling does not stay on. So we had to save the cluster from itself one time there. So always make sure your cooling systems have some type of redundant power on them too, if you're gonna just be aware your cluster can burn itself up. Basically, if your power goes down, you've got UPSs but no backup power on that, on your cooling. When we built the larger cluster, it was actually at a proper data center facility with heating, cooling, HVAC, all those type of systems, cooling towers, that type of thing, water running through it. So we used a chilled door system. So essentially, there was the front end. So our machines were oriented in aisles. Instead of having with a hot aisle, for example, if you're in Stampede 2 at the Texas Advanced Computing Center, their hot aisle is 50 feet long, and it's got thousands of machines pointing into that hot aisle, oriented so that, as we've explained, the heat is pushed into that aisle. So the outsides of the machines are on the outside of that. We had essentially just straight banks of racks, lined up in rows. And so as air was pulled through the front of them by the fans, they went into this chilled door system that was essentially these big doors that went over the back of the racks that had water circulating through them. And so it helped to increase the cooling efficiency. So we didn't need a hot aisle. That was sufficient for the amount of gear that we had to take care of most of the heat. Because like I said, we had like water cooling HVAC systems that, half of this place was like a data center floor, and then there was all kinds of other equipment. But yeah, it was mostly chilled doors. There's some nice photos of me out in front of those chilled doors out there in different places. But yeah, so as air gets sucked in through the front of them, it gets pushed out the back, but instead of just getting pushed out into like an air cooling thing, it gets pushed out into like this big like door that like seals the entire back of the rack. So you have to like open it, and when you pull it open, you've got all your gear there, but in the meantime, it's circulating water through it to take away the heat that's being pushed back into it. So that's what we used there.
On your photo comment, the chilled doors look really cool because they're lit in such a way to make them look like the underside of some tuner's car with like neon and stuff. So
they've got like neon blue. It's
yeah, they look really cool, but they also are kind of a pain when you actually need to do something on the on the rack. You've got to like open the door and get in there, and sometimes they can be in your way to like pull the rack out or pull a board out or something. So
yeah, because they're pretty heavy too. They're like a good like probably 50-pound door or something like that. Like they're pretty heavy each. But yeah, I've also seen like the immersion cooling units. They have some of those, for example, the Texas Advanced Computing Center, and it's basically just this big like 10-foot long bin with this huge pool of mineral oil in it and all the GPUs immersed in it. And it actually keeps things cool enough that there's like frost around the edges of it. So it's kind of an interesting system. But from what I've always heard about that type of thing, one of the problems with like the larger and larger GPUs that we're using for AI is that the actual like power consumption of those is going up. Like some of the newer models are upwards of like 400 watts or better. So what I've heard is that when you want to stack, like the standard 8 GPU box is about 4U or so. If you want to stack, 8 of these new GPUs in a 4U package, it comes down to you have to like have a little immersion cooling type thing because there's just so much heat coming off of those that air cooling isn't possible. So some of the like later GPUs I've heard are starting to run into like more of that immersion cooling thing. It's kind of been like a fun novelty up until now, like, ooh, they have those immersion cooling units attack. But it's becoming more and more of like an actual reality for how people are really running things at a very high level.
That's incredible. I mean, I'm sure like as time goes by, we'll have more and more innovative ways to cool these racks for sure. So it's going to be exciting to see kind of what's coming down the pike here. Can you guys touch on, so we talked a little bit about like, what do you do with all the power as it's coming in to make sure that it's stable and it's cool? Like, how does this tie into what you see as the environmental concerns for these types of data centers? Like what is it that concerns you, Fernanda? Just about like, is it the space, the money, the energy?
I mean, certainly energy is a concern. There was, there's talk not too long ago, maybe about a month ago, where the infamous Elon Musk wanted to put a data center somewhere in Tennessee, and of course, I have a place in Tennessee and out in Memphis, and it's we're already having issues with power in general, right? In places like California, and there's only so much you can do and grow, and to put a new power plant, it takes quite a bit in the United States. There are other countries that are getting way ahead of us in creating sorts of renewable clean energy solutions, right? There's lots of nuclear plants going in China. And so I think those places are going to be much better prepared for the density and the needs of data centers in the future if we're going to continue to grow this sort of stuff. But, the effect that it will have in a town is, I think, kind of remains to be seen. If a town all of a sudden wants to grow its residents, it might not be because it's beholden to a data center. And I'm not sure that we're going to continue in this path to reduce the power usage of GPUs. I mean, we were just talking about how these GPUs are getting much more dense, and so there's only so much physics, at the bottom that you can improve on, and but there's still a lot of room at the top and the software's end that we can do to reduce models and reduce improve software usage and improve everything else. So I think before we start thinking about throwing hardware things, as someone who's on the software side now and peddling optimized software, we should look at the top of things to improve software usage and software need before we throw hardware at it.
Thank you.
Yeah. There's a concern to there's a concern. I have a concern. I don't know if there's generally a concern, but one of the things that concerns me is that. So I was thinking a little bit about this topic this morning, in anticipation of this, webinar, and so software optimization is obviously going to be one thing that we're going to need if we're going to reduce energy consumption and heat waste and things like that from AI. But at the same time, I'm concerned that a lot of AI is the type of computation that it can almost always benefit from having more horsepower thrown at it. And so a lot of these types of things, you can just continue to scale them up, and it's like, okay, well, we've just done some software optimization to make the algorithm more efficient. Great. That doesn't mean that we're going to run it on fewer GPUs.
Right.
It just means that we're going to make our model higher definition. How do you tell a bunch of AI researchers, okay, that's good enough? Stop there. I mean, we used to have this issue. It wasn't with AI, but it was with molecular dynamics folks who were modeling interactions between atoms and molecules, and they always wanted more. Like a lot of other folks, a lot of other disciplines at the NIH, they would need a set amount of compute to get their computations done, and then they'd be finished. But the molecular dynamics folks, it was like you can always add more to the you can get better results out of your model if you just add more compute. So I don't care how big you make your cluster, I want to use all of it.
As a molecular dynamicist, yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
We reduce when Oak Ridge put on Titan, right, which was that inflection point of using GPUs. We saw these runs that used to run 8 hours go down to an hour, and then we saw them creep up little by little up to the 8 hours. And what had happened was that they added more physics, right? So if I'm doing a climate simulation that runs 8 hours, well, now I can add maybe more chemistry, and I can add more tracers, and I can add more layers, and I can add more things to my simulation. So I agree in the sense that I think AI will grow, but I disagree that AI needs to, because I've listened to my stats friends, so statistical people, always find ways to do computations on the cheap and isolate the sorts of variables that go into models, that right now people who are not trained in stats are just putting everything but the kitchen sink inside these models. And I hear my stats friends going, what you're doing is utterly unnecessary. We could have done it with much smaller. And you see a component of people building these small and tiny little models that can do this sort of work of really big models. But in the end, even if I can do it in a small model, now I'm going to do more with small models, right? Now it's just going to be cheaper for me to run small models and make it more available to other people. So I don't know that we're ever going to reduce compute side. I think that at some point, if money's unlimited and NVIDIA and TSMC can build all of the things that the customers have bought, in the end, power consumption is going to be the limit to how much compute we can actually run.
We're going to need a Dyson sphere around the sun to get the those last few billion parameters out of the thing.
There you go.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's oh, look at this here. Oh, I can't even see that. Can somebody else read it? I need to make my screen larger. Okay, tip. Be sure to have cooling on different power sources not all attached to the same UPS, split between redundant UPS, or have city UPS power sources plugged in.
Which is an advantage of the immersion systems, that things don't break right away. So if you have your compute in an immersion system, it can keep running before that oil gets too hot to handle, and it might be able to actually overcome whatever temporary power disruption. Whereas in a data center, it'll take a few minutes and then it'll be over. Like, things will start kind of falling apart, and you need to bring it down, and you need to do it quickly. In fact, the UPS, if I remember correctly, if I believe what was told to me at Oak Ridge, the UPS was there for the file system, because then it was still platters and disks, and you wanted to bring the file system down, gracefully, but the compute could just crash. Like, that's it. We're not going to worry about that.
Yeah, in an academic environment or a research environment, the conversation is always, well, you could have redundant power and guarantee that uptime, but if we didn't do that, how much more compute could we buy? And so
There you go.
it always goes towards like less redundancy and more compute, because the math tends to work out that with as often as it goes down, which isn't that often, you would rather have this much more compute for the time that it is up. But yeah, if the file system goes away, that's real bad.
So let's wrap up here, you guys. If you want to have like a final word on your perspective on data center power and environmental considerations, we'll start with Forrest.
I think power costs will continue to grow, and power sources will continue to be developed. AI is an incredibly industrially useful technology. And so we'll see how much of it actually sticks in the end, and how many of these AI data centers are not essentially having their space sold out here in a few years when the AI boom proves to be like the .com bubble. But sorry about that. I agree with Fernanda quite a bit when we discuss the need for alternative power sources, especially around nuclear, as things are only going to continue to scale higher and higher across compute. Everything is getting more complex. Basically, all use cases, like you say, molecular dynamics, stuff like that. As much compute, and people will use as much compute as you can throw at it in the end. So I think in the end, we will continue to slide up the Kardashev scale, and eventually, like I said, maybe we'll have the Dyson sphere to get those last few parameters, or those last few bitcoins in the end, for that matter.
Certainly, human nature is more, and more. So maybe the trick is to like direct ourselves in the direction, right? So it's not like more of everything. Let's just go in this direction. What do you think, Dave?
So I'll relate a quick story, little anecdote. So at the NIH, one of the tasks that I did while I was there at one point in time is we received, I forget how many racks, it was 4 or 6 racks of GPU enabled computers. And part of integrating them into the cluster, one of the jobs I was tasked with was to just like run them at like max speed after we got them all put in there and make sure and see what would break, like basically just spin them all up. And so, at the time I was using, like, it was kind of a while ago. And so I just came up with a little TensorFlow thing that was just ridiculous, but would just run and just, heat up all the GPUs. And we turned that on, and then I put it on a delay so that we could walk into the machine room and we could wait for a few seconds and it would all spin up. And it was amazing because everything would spin up at once. And all of a sudden it would be like you were standing next to a jet engine. You couldn't, like, all the fans and everything, all of a sudden you couldn't hear. And you have to yell at the person next to you. And they had little like meters on the front of the rack showing how much power consumption they were using. And that would just like start to, go really fast and really, go up really high. And I forget what the measurement was, if it was megawatts or what it was, but whatever it was, it was the first time I really got to thinking. I was like, wow, I'm burning a lot of electricity here. And like, is this worth it? Like, how much carbon am I producing right now just to kind of test these things and make sure they're okay? And like, and so it really made me think about like all the jobs I'd run in the past and how many of them were like really, really necessary versus like, I'm just doing some exploratory stuff. And like, or when you make a mistake and you run a bunch of compute and you're like, oh crap, I got to go back and run it all over again. It's like, this has real effects on the environment. You're like producing carbon, like every time you do that on, just by generating the electricity and then, producing the heat on the way out. And I don't know. So, I think it's really cool that, we're thinking more about this. And I think that, everybody kind of needs to think about when you're using cloud, when you're using like this has real, like there's a data center somewhere with fans screaming that are, that you're making those things happen. And, you're producing carbon, which is, so, think about the compute you use and try to be, if you don't have to, maybe don't use it.
I can't get an image of a screaming fan out of my head. It's just hair on fire. Anyway. Okay. Jonathan, what you want to have some final thoughts here about our environment and power and data centers and AI?
Sure. So I really like when like more and more data centers are being placed explicitly in a location for some reason. And in the past, that's been like proximity to the people using it. But as our networks have improved, that's less of a concern. So like the cluster that I was on at University of Colorado Boulder, one of the benefits there was because of the humidity. We got a lot of what we called free cooling. Like 9 months out of the year, the only power we had to spend to cool the system was just pumping the water around, and it went to a chilling tower, and it just was evaporative cooling. And then, in the heat of the summer, we'd have to run a chiller. But in that same mindset, the National Center for Atmospheric Research, Mesa Lab, just down the road, like they, rather than put a data center in Boulder, they partnered with the University of Wyoming to like take that one step further, and their data centers up there, and do a whole lights out facility so that the cooling and infrastructure is cheaper up there. And I think in the past, like I was talking about enterprise style, what we kind of call in the HPC world a closet cluster. People would just, without any thought for cooling, they would just build a cluster and put it in a closet and hope that the cooling would be fine. And there's one step of additional professionalism of, you build a data center, you control your cooling, you understand that. I think as our power concerns go up, I'm interested to see more and more the power be considered in scope with the system and not something that you're just getting from a utility, but how are we powering this thing? Where is that electricity coming from? And is there somewhere that we can bake this data center together with some kind of power generation, whether it's a traditional or nuclear style power plant, something like that? Or I think it was Forrest was telling me a story about people that were putting little containerized data centers next to these little oil wells, or maybe natural gas wells. Maybe that was what it was. And when the price of Bitcoin made it profitable, they would run the data center off the natural gas coming off the well right there. And it was this one kind of cohesive, confined thing that was just self-sustaining. I think there's opportunity for doing that, with a big solar farm next to your data center or something like that. We were talking about supplementing the power for our data center by putting panels over the parking lot that was right outside of it, and how much would that offset the requirements of that data center in there. So I'm interested in just thinking of it as in scope when you're building a data center. How could we supplement or generate our own power for it? But then also, maybe instead of always trying to push the fastest we could possibly go, like Dave was saying, how much power can we generate? And what if we stayed within that budget and dealt with it through efficiency there? Like reset our level of expectation to what we can realistically generate on site, and then improve efficiencies from there rather than just letting it explode and take resources from wherever we can get it.
Well said, man. Yeah, that was great. I think Dave just put a little note in here that using the excess heat to heat other buildings. Oh, so like if it's like in the basement or something, and then there's people working above, that they would take the heat and kind of during the winter time push it up to the other rooms.
Well, yeah, but there's even centers, in places like Amsterdam and Germany and stuff that are taking the heat and actually move them to other buildings within the city, and
Oh,
actually,
cool.
take they basically are recycling the excess heat from the data center to use it to, heat other buildings and things. So it's a pretty cool idea as well, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I heard an anecdote at one point, at least, that the NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, I think is what it is. They were they at least have some portion of their facility that pumps the hot water like through the sidewalks for snow melt and things like that. At least that is the thing that I have heard repeatedly. I've not verified it independently.
See, people are cool when we need to be, right, Fernanda? Why don't you take us home? Close us
Well,
out.
they kind of took one of my points, which is I was gonna get on that idea of like how we use power and then we just kind of throw it away, right? Like it's done its thing, and then we shoot it off into the air, literally, and we just kind of forget that it was there. I was watching today. There's this lady on YouTube. She has these shorts. Her name is Chloe, and she was talking about how they came up with a new way to get geothermal energy. So in places where they don't have like any water, underground water to get that geothermal energy out, they're fracking. They're using fracking technology to inject water to get heated up deeper in the mantle, and then using that heated water, back up. And I was like, you can just connect to a data center. Like, why haven't we? Because a heat pump is like this amazing thing that is just becoming more ubiquitous. It's so good at extracting energy and extracting heat, or dumping heat, and we could extract so much out of this. And so if we could find ways to integrate not just a local power, clean power, hopefully nuclear. As a physicist, I believe in clean nuclear energy, but then integrating that reuse of whatever we've done, what we would otherwise dump into the atmosphere, into other closed loop systems that people can tap into. Like now, I've got heated water from a data center. Let's send that around into local buildings so that heat pumps can extract the energy out of that. That is one way that we can just stop the bleed and just make a little bit, the system just a little. It's not going to be 100% efficiency. We know that. We know the physics is never going to give us 100% back. But if we can get 30% back out of whatever we're dumping into the sky, great. Let's do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Okay, you guys. There is hope for us yet. There are many ideas out there, and many people that are maybe just being born that are going to come up with more amazing ideas of how to make sure that this amazing earth that we live on continues to be beautiful for all the generations to come. And we can also do cool things with AI and these big, data centers. It's cool to see how it kind of can all come together. And thank you guys for your time and your energy. Thank you everybody for watching. Cheers. You can go to ciq.com if you have any questions. You can just kind of chat into us, and we'd love to chat with you about all the cool things that we're doing here too in terms of compute. So we got support for Rocky Linux, and we got Fuzzball on the horizon that we're going to be talking about more about in the next few weeks. We've got Werewolf, we've got Aptainer, we've got Ascender. So we'd love to chat with you more. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next week. Same time, same place. Mwah. Bye, guys.